When I called to ask why I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding, he didn't even flinch. He just said, "It's complicated. Just send the keys to the beach house, Noah. It's for family. That house, my mother left it to me. It's all I had. And now they were throwing $1 million wedding on it without me." So I flew back, quiet, uninvited. And by the time the vows began, I was standing with a copy of the deed, a camera in my hand, and a federal agent on speed dial. I was sitting on my balcony in Portland sipping a lukewarm coffee when Jake, an old college friend, texted me a picture. Ethan Gray and Ava Kingsley saved the date. April 15th, Santa Barbara, California. I stared at the screen. Ethan is my older brother. I hadn't heard a word about a wedding. It took me a minute to process it. I scrolled back through our messages, checked missed calls, even opened my email just in case. Nothing. No message from Ethan. No call. Not even a lazy, "Hey, I'm getting married." Just this invite sent to someone else. We hadn't been close in years, that much was true. But we weren't enemies either. At least I didn't think so. 3 days later, my father, Douglas Gray, called. He sounded rushed, businesslike, like he always did when he needed something. "Noah, Ethan's wedding is coming up. He's planning to host it at the beach house. I need you to send me the keys." I blinked. "What, the house in Santa Barbara? It'll be the perfect venue. Ethan already arranged everything. Guests, catering, the works. You mean the house Mom left me?" Dad paused. "Technically, it's part of the family estate. Don't be difficult about this." I clenched my jaw. That house wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was my only real connection to my mother. She died when I was 17 and her will had made it clear. That house was mine. I'd lived there briefly after college, paid for the repairs, maintained it. Even now I visited it once a month just to breathe that ocean air. "Ethan didn't even invite me," I said finally. "And now you want the keys. He assumed you'd understand. It's a big event for the family. Don't make this about you." I ended the call without another word. That sentence, "don't make this about you," echoed in my head like a slap. It always had. Growing up, Ethan was the golden boy. Star athlete, straight A student, dad's pride. I was the quiet one, the reader, the afterthought. Mom was the only one who saw me differently. That night, I poured myself a whiskey and sat on the floor of my apartment, pulling out the manila envelope I kept in my filing cabinet. Inside was her will. Rebecca Gray had handwritten it, and in it she left the Santa Barbara house to me, in full. No joint ownership, no confusion. My name, Noah Gray. I ran my fingers over the ink. It had been so many years since I read it, but I still remembered her voice, calm and sure. "One day you'll need a place that's yours, a place no one can take from you." Apparently, Ethan and Dad didn't get the memo. 2 days later, a FedEx envelope arrived at my door. Inside was a formal request from a law office in Beverly Hills asking for temporary access to the Santa Barbara property in order to facilitate a family wedding event. No contract, no explanation of damages or cleanup, just a line at the bottom asking me to sign and return the key. I didn't sign. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed a weekend bag, grabbed the original deed from my drawer, and booked a flight to California. I wasn't going to crash the wedding. Not yet. I just needed to stand inside that house one more time, to remind myself it was mine, to see if this betrayal burned as badly in the sea breeze as it did in my living room. Santa Barbara greeted me with a bright sky and cool wind. As the Uber pulled up the palm-lined road to the house, I felt a twist in my gut. The driveway was already packed with rental vans. A floral company's logo was printed on the side of one. 2 strangers were hanging fairy lights on the front porch. I didn't even get out of the car. I asked the driver to turn around and drop me at a nearby motel. I needed time to think. Inside that dull beige room, I sat on the bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Ethan hadn't told me. Dad had dismissed me. They'd all decided I didn't matter. Again. But this time they were standing on my ground, and that changed everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the buzz of traffic outside and the occasional creak of the motel air conditioner. My thoughts kept dragging me back to Mom, to the way she used to run her fingers through my hair when I was little and scared, to the smell of her lavender lotion, to the soft click of her heels down the hall before dinner. Memories I thought I had buried years ago surfaced with raw edges. She died just before my high school graduation. Brain aneurysm. No warning. One day we were arguing over whether I should apply to a college in state or out, and the next she was gone. Dad buried himself in work. Ethan got a promotion and a new car. And I got the silence. But I remembered the reading of the will. I remembered how the attorney cleared his throat and said my name. I remembered the exact line, "To my son Noah, I leave the beach house in Santa Barbara. Not to the family, not to be shared, to me." The next morning I drove to a nearby print shop and made 3 certified copies of the deed. I kept the original tucked into a hard envelope at the bottom of my duffel bag. I wasn't going to let anyone claim ignorance. Not this time. Back at the motel, I called Mrs. Callahan, Mom's old friend, and the notary who had witnessed the will. She still lived in the valley, retired now. When I asked if she remembered the signing, she laughed gently. "Of course I remember, Noah. Your mother was very clear. She said that house was your sanctuary, told me you'd need it someday when things got messy." Things were definitely messy now. That afternoon, I drove to the house. I parked 2 blocks down and walked. I didn't want to make a scene. Not yet. The house looked different, too perfect, like something out of a bridal magazine. White fabric wrapped the banisters. Pink roses framed the door. There was a catering truck parked along the curb and a crew unloading tables through the side gate. I watched from the sidewalk for a while, feeling like a stranger peeking into someone else's life. I saw Ethan walk out the front door, phone to his ear, gesturing. He was wearing loafers and a crisp button-down, always the image of confidence, the kind of man who thought everything belonged to him by default. I wanted to walk up and shout, to tell the decorators to leave, to tell Ethan to go to hell. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I walked past, slowly kept my head down, and made my way around to the back alley. The guest house door still had the same keypad lock I installed 5 years ago. I punched in the code. It clicked open. Inside, everything smelled like lemon oil and dust. My books were still on the shelf. The blue quilt Mom sewed was still folded on the bench. No one had touched this room. No one had dared. I sat on the bed and exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. I pulled out the envelope, laid the deed flat on the nightstand, and stared at it. My mother's signature, the embossed seal, my name. They could ignore me. They could pretend I didn't exist, but they couldn't erase this. Not this. I stayed in that room until the sun dipped behind the hills. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just listened to the distant sounds of celebration being built on the OT. The next morning, I called Toby Myers. He was my roommate in college now, a private investigator in San Diego. He owed me a favor. Toby was the kind of guy who could find out what your dentist had for breakfast 10 years ago. He picked up after 2 rings. "You finally calling to invite me to your wedding?" he joked. "Not quite," I said. "I need dirt on someone. Ava Kingsley, the fiancé." "Yeah, something feels off. Can you run a deep background check? I'll pay whatever you need. You got it. Give me 24 hours. I spent the day walking through the outskirts of town, avoiding the wedding setup. I needed space to breathe. Ava. I hadn't even met her. Not once. My brother had been dating her for less than a year. She had no history in our family, no roots, yet here she was, taking over my mother's house. By evening, Toby called back. His voice had dropped the playful tone. Noah, you were right to be suspicious. Ava Kingsley isn't her legal name. Her birth name is Evelyn Cartwright. She changed it 5 years ago after settling a lawsuit in Nevada. Financial fraud. My blood went cold. What kind of fraud? She posed as a financial advisor. Convinced an elderly couple to sign over their retirement funds. Claimed it was for investments. They lost everything. She avoided prison by taking a plea deal and paying restitution. Then she vanished. New name, new state. I sat down on the edge of the motel bed. Does Ethan know? If he does, he's either in on it or stupid. Toby sent over a file, old newspaper clippings, a grainy court sketch. Evelyn's face was thinner, younger, but the eyes were the same, calculating, calm, cold. I stared at the photos for a long time. This woman was going to marry my brother, in my house, with my father clapping in the front row. This wasn't just a slight, it was a con. I pulled out Mom's will again and read the last paragraph, the one that never failed to make me stop breathing for a second. If you ever feel like the world is erasing you, Noah, remember that this house is your anchor. Stand your ground. I looked at the wall, at the quiet decor of the guest room, at the world being built on the other side. Then I picked up my phone and told Toby, keep digging. Find out who else she's done this to. And hurry. I didn't wait for more information. I needed to look Ethan in the eye. The next morning I cleaned up, put on a button-down that didn't look too wrinkled, and headed to the house. The sun was already high when I walked up the driveway. People moved around like bees in a hive, decorating chairs, checking light fixtures, rehearsing movement like it was Broadway. I caught sight of him on the side porch arguing with a planner over flower arrangements. I walked up slow and deliberate. He turned mid-sentence and blinked. Noah Morning, I said. He looked like he hadn't seen a ghost, but maybe wished he had. What are you doing here, checking on my house? I said. He motioned for the planner to give us a minute. She walked away, glancing back twice. We stood under the white trellis they had just finished hanging garlands from. I didn't know you were in town, he said. You didn't know because you didn't invite me. He rubbed the back of his neck. Look, it's complicated. That's convenient. Noah, come on. We haven't exactly been close. That's not the same as being erased. He sighed. It wasn't personal. Ava handled the guest list. She didn't think your brother should be at your wedding. Silence. I reached into my bag and pulled out the original deed, holding it between us. This is personal. That house is mine. His jaw tensed. We thought it made sense to host it here. It's part of the family. No, it was Mom's, and she left it to me. You know that. She would have wanted us to share. I stared at him. You don't get to speak for her. He folded his arms. What are you planning to do? Cancel the wedding. Make a scene I don't know yet. He scoffed and turned away. You always did love drama. I watched his back as he disappeared into the crowd of florists and planners. I walked around the side of the house and down the path to the guest house. Once inside, I locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, deed in my hands, my heartbeat dull in my ears. I wasn't just angry. I was done pretending. And I wasn't leaving. The following morning, I took the deed and headed to the local law office where Kimberly Walsh worked. She had been my friend since college, now a real estate attorney in Santa Barbara. We hadn't spoken in months, but when I walked into her office holding the document, she welcomed me like no time had passed. You brought the original, she asked. I nodded and handed it over. She studied it closely under a desk lamp, flipping through the notarized pages, tracing the seal with her finger. "Noah, this isn't just solid, it's airtight. Your mother's intentions are crystal clear. This house is yours, sole ownership. No room for misinterpretation. If anyone tries to claim otherwise, they're wasting their time." I exhaled for what felt like the first time that day. "Can you prepare a cease and desist? Something formal. I can send to Ethan and Ava's planner, maybe even the vendors, absolutely. Give me until tomorrow morning. You'll have documents drafted, served if needed." I thanked her, then stopped at a quiet coffee shop on the way back to the motel. My mind was racing. Ethan had called me dramatic. I was starting to think he didn't even believe I'd show up, that I'd just roll over and give him whatever he wanted like I always did. Not this time. Back in the motel, I found an envelope wedged under my door, no return address, just my name scribbled in unfamiliar cursive. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. I recognized the handwriting instantly. My mother's. It was a letter I hadn't seen before, dated just a week before her death. "Noah, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. I tried to talk to your father and brother about this house, but I know them. I know how they think. I gave this letter to Mrs. Callahan to hold just in case. I didn't leave the beach house to Ethan for a reason. He's too much like his father. Entitled, dismissive, always chasing more. This house is meant for peace, for rebuilding. And I see that in you. Please don't let them take it from you. Love, Mom." I sat on the bed, clutching the letter with shaking hands. Somehow, even from the grave, she'd anticipated all of this. The pressure, the gaslighting, the manipulation. I called Toby. "You find anything else?" "Yeah," he said. "Ava's not working alone. Her mother, Lorraine Cartwright, has a long history of posing as a nonprofit director. She's been under investigation for running fake charities. No convictions, but enough red flags to make Christmas look dull. They're scamming Ethan, looks like it. Lorraine's been in town for a week, staying at the Rosemont Inn under Ava's tab. Quiet but present. My guess she's handling the money while Ava charms your brother." I nodded slowly. "Can you send me photos, paper trails, anything I can use already in your inbox?" I opened my laptop and clicked through the files. Bank statements, wire transfers, registered aliases. Ava had used at least 3 different names over the last 6 years. And each time there was a wealthy man involved in a quietly closed settlement. This wasn't love. This was strategy. I printed every page, marked them up, and began compiling my own folder. I was done asking for acknowledgement. I was building a case, and I wasn't going to let them rewrite the ending. Not this time. The sun climbed slowly over the ocean as I drove south on the 101, the light turning the coastal hills gold. I hadn't slept. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter with every mile. My thoughts were no longer tangled with doubt or confusion. They were sharp, clear, pointed like a blade. I was no longer there to observe. I was there to remember, to document, and when the time came, to strike. As I approached the neighborhood, my stomach tightened. The house stood tall at the end of the cul-de-sac, now transformed into something almost unrecognizable. Balloons, flower garlands, designer tents, valet parking signs. It looked more like a luxury resort than a home. My home. I didn't pull into the driveway. Instead, I parked down the street around the corner, slipped on a baseball cap and sunglasses, and walked the rest of the way. I kept my steps slow and casual, like I was just out for a stroll. My phone was already recording in my pocket camera, angled through a small hole in my jacket. It wasn't the most professional setup, but it would do. Guests were arriving in waves, women in pastel chiffon, men in linen suits. Laughter spilled out of the backyard. Someone was giving directions to a catering crew while a group of kids ran across the front lawn, narrowly avoiding a towering ice sculpture being wheeled in through the gate. I paused at the hedge near the property line. From here I could see everything. The arch, the altar, the rows of chairs, the sound system blaring a carefully curated playlist. Waiters in black and white moved like ants across the patio. The main house gleamed in the morning light, spotless, elegant, like it had never belonged to someone who grieved alone in its walls. I spotted Ethan first. He was near the pool, adjusting his tie in a handheld mirror. A woman with a headset gave him instructions, which he nodded to with that trademark gray confidence. Ava appeared a few moments later wearing an ivory jumpsuit for the pre-ceremony brunch. She looked radiant, fake, flawless. And then, as if on cue, Lorraine Cartwright emerged from the house like a general inspecting her troops. Her gaze swept over the setting with satisfaction. She looked right past me without recognition. I knew better than to assume she hadn't noticed me. That woman noticed everything. I continued walking. A few feet ahead, I passed the rental truck for the audio equipment. No one was watching, so I snapped a few close-ups of the company name and license plate, just in case. Around the back of the house, I slipped into the guest house using the old keypad. The code still worked. Inside, the air was stale but familiar. I locked the door behind me and sat at the desk. I pulled out the envelope with the cease and desist documents Kimberly had sent me overnight and began prepping copies. I printed labels for each vendor planner and rental company involved in the wedding. I had names, contacts, timestamps, and footage. Everything that proved what they were participating in an illegal occupation of private property. I wasn't going to confront them yet, not directly. First, I needed leverage. Just after 11, I left the guest house and walked to the edge of the garden path. I kept to the shadows just behind the landscaping wall, watching through the slats. The officiant had arrived. Guests were being seated. The band shifted to classical string arrangements. Then I saw something that made my jaw clench. The seating chart posted by the entrance. Ethan's name. Ava's name. Lorraine's. But nowhere, not even in the extended family section, was my name listed. Not even a pity mention. Not even as a distant cousin. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately erased. Ava stood at the top of the patio stairs, welcoming more guests. Her hand rested possessively on Ethan's arm. I saw her glance at the guest house once briefly, like she sensed something wasn't quite right. She was right. Back inside, I began copying files from my phone and laptop onto a secure USB drive. I added the guest list, the seating chart, and a map of the property showing vendor locations. I wasn't going to rely on one piece of evidence. I needed a case. Solid. Bulletproof. At 12:30, the ceremony started. From my window, I saw the wedding party walk out to soft music. Ethan stood at the altar, his hands clasped calmly in front of him. Ava followed, her veil trailing behind her like a curtain of silk. The guests rose. The music swelled. I stayed seated. I watched every second of it through a tiny crack in the curtain camera, still recording. The vows, the smiles, the cheers. I memorized the way Ethan kissed her hand, the way Ava looked out into the crowd like she'd already won. Toby replied within seconds. A link, a file, a voice memo. I listened first. 5 names, Toby said. 5 women, 5 states, same pattern. Ava Kingsley, sometimes under the name Audrey Quinn or Eliza Carr, met a wealthy man, dated for months, convinced him to buy property or co-sign investments. Each time her mother Lorraine was involved. Each time the man lost everything. I opened the file. Details of bank transfers, settlement agreements, court documents, all pointing to a pattern of sophisticated financial manipulation. But it was one name that stopped me cold. Her name was Julia Dane, Colorado. She had filed a police report, hired an attorney, and publicly accused Ava of financial fraud. But after months of legal battles and online smear campaigns, she lost everything. She took her own life 2 years ago. My hands tightened into fists. I stared at Julia's photo, a smiling woman with a golden retriever in her lap, and something shifted in me. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. I forwarded the files to Kimberly and asked her to verify them through federal channels. Within an hour, she called back. "Noah, I just got off with Agent Sloan," she said. "FBI, Financial Crimes Division. He's been tracking Lorraine Cartwright for years, but could never get anything to stick. If this evidence is real, it could reopen everything." "Good," I said. "I want him to have everything." I sent a secure folder with all the files Toby had collected. Photos, names, statements, financial trails. I added Ava and Lorraine's new aliases, the Santa Barbara address, the upcoming marriage license. Agent Sloan called me directly the next morning. "I've seen enough to open a preliminary investigation," he said. "But I need you to keep quiet. We can't risk tipping them off. If they run again, we might lose them." "They're not going anywhere," I told him. "They're planning a honeymoon right here, then sit tight and keep recording." It wasn't the kind of justice I imagined at the start, but it was better than shouting into the void. This time, there were professionals involved. This time, I wasn't the only one who saw the mask slipping. I returned to the guest house and began organizing the footage by category: property use, impersonation, event vendors, interactions with guests. I documented every detail. Ava smiling at the camera crew, Lorraine instructing the caterers, Ethan giving a toast on the lawn. They had turned my sanctuary into a stage, and I would use every frame to tear it all down. That night I stayed up rewatching everything, hours of footage. Every smile Ava gave was surgically placed. Every movement Lorraine made screamed of control. I studied Ethan's face in the background of each clip, wondering if he truly didn't know or just refused to see. Then the memories of Julia Dane returned. Toby had also dug up the court testimonies, heartbreaking raw. Julia tried to warn others, but the legal machinery turned against her. Lorraine and Ava had countersued for defamation, silenced her with power and manipulation. One lawsuit after another buried her until there was nothing left. No justice, no voice. I printed her final statement, framed it next to my laptop. I owed her something. I owed them all. By morning, I had created 3 separate drives. One to give Sloan, one for backup in a secure storage unit, one that would go public if anything happened to me. At noon, Toby arrived in person. We sat in silence at the kitchen table in the guest house. "They're dangerous," he said finally. "So am I answered. We reviewed everything again. Names, trails, a timeline of Ava's movements across states, Lorraine's shifting nonprofit records. Toby's contact at the IRS had flagged at least 2 foundations that hadn't filed taxes in 5 years. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion. "If Sloan's serious, he'll have enough for a grand jury by the end of the week," Toby said. That gave me 4 days to tighten the noose. As we talked, I noticed something in the footage we hadn't before. A moment where Lorraine hands a folder to a man in a navy suit I hadn't seen earlier. His posture, the way Ava glanced at him later, it clicked. "Who is that?" I asked. Toby leaned in. "He's not a vendor." I scrubbed through the footage. He appeared again outside the garage speaking with Ethan. They were arguing quietly. Then Ethan shook his head and walked away. "He's the key," I muttered. "He knows something." Toby nodded. I'll find him. By evening, the sun dipped low behind the bluffs, casting long shadows across the lawn that wasn't theirs. Guests had left. The staff began clearing chairs. Ava twirled barefoot on the patio while Ethan watched, drink in hand. Lorraine made a call from the balcony. The performance was winding down, but my role was only beginning. The first call came just after sunrise. I was in the guest house halfway through labeling the last folder of documents for Sloan when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A pause. Then Lorraine's voice, cool, composed, clinical. If you care about your father, I'd think very carefully about what you're doing. I didn't say anything. My silence seemed to embolden her. This family has already lost enough. Don't be the one who burns what's left. Walk away, Noah. Let your brother have his moment. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. A glimpse into how far they'd go to protect the illusion they had built. 2 hours later, an email from Ethan arrived. A scanned PDF. A contract. Temporary transfer of occupancy rights. Legalese meant to look harmless, buried beneath pleasantries. I thought this might ease tensions, his message read. Just for the honeymoon. We'll leave everything as we found it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the lie. Just entitlement dressed in legal stationery. That night I returned to my apartment in downtown Santa Monica for the first time in weeks. As I approached the door, something felt off. The hallway was too quiet, the usual scent of Mrs. Ramirez's cooking absent. I unlocked the door slowly, slipped inside. On the counter sat a manila envelope, no name, no label. Inside, photographs. Me walking out of Kimberly's law office. Me speaking with Toby outside the guest house. Me alone at the beach behind the Malibu house. Someone had been watching. Close enough to track every move. My blood ran cold. I checked the locks, pulled the blinds, pulled out my backup phone and texted Kimberly and Sloan. We're compromised. The response was instant. Sloan, you need to disappear for 48 hours. We'll handle the rest, Kimberly. Get out of the city now. I grabbed the pre-packed duffel from under my bed. I had prepared for this. I didn't know how, but I had. By nightfall, I was driving north on the PCH burner phone in the glove box, laptop in the trunk. My destination was an old fishing cabin Toby's family owned in Mendocino. No cell service, no internet, just pine trees, salt air, and quiet. On the way, I replayed Lorraine's words. If you care about your father. Was she bluffing? Or was Ethan truly willing to let her threaten the last living parent we had? My father, the man who stood by while I was erased. Would he even care if something happened to me I didn't know anymore? At the cabin, I set up a temporary workstation. The files were safe, the drives were encrypted. I made 3 additional copies. Sent one to Sloan by courier, one to Kimberly, one locked in a bank vault in Santa Rosa. Then I waited. On the 3rd day, the cabin phone rang. Toby. They tried to pull the wedding video offline, claimed copyright, but I already made backups, also the man in the Navy suit. His name is Craig Fulton. He used to work for Lorraine's foundation. IRS has him flagged. Can he testify, I asked. Already flipped, Toby said. Gave Sloan a full statement. He was the one handling the fake donation receipts. I let out a slow breath. The tide was turning, but I also knew what that meant. People like Lorraine don't go down quietly. They drag you with them. The next morning, I returned to Santa Barbara. The wedding was over. The guests were gone. The honeymoon had begun. But so had the reckoning. The car was still warm when I pulled into the driveway of my mother's house. Correction, my house. The one they'd used as their wedding venue without consent. The string lights still hung from the eaves and petals were strewn across the lawn like they belonged there. It was surreal. Like stepping into a parallel life I wasn't supposed to see. The ceremony was underway. I could hear the gentle hum of a violin, the soft murmur of chairs shifting, guests whispering. I took a breath, stepped out, and walked the path up the hill. No one noticed at first, not until I reached the stone archway. Ethan stood beside Ava, her hand looped through his arm. The officiant smiled warmly. A hush fell over the crowd as I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Whispers rose. "Is that Noah? Wasn't he out of state?" A few people stood. Ava's smile froze. Ethan blinked, disoriented. I didn't look at them. I walked up to the microphone, tapped it once. Feedback rang out, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Good afternoon," I said. Pause. "This ceremony is being held on private property. Property owned solely by me as per the legal documents on file with the County of Los Angeles. I was not informed of this event. I did not approve its use, and I do not give my permission for it to continue." Gasps. Ava's face drained of color. Lorraine at the back of the aisle turned without a word and began walking away. Effective immediately, I continued, "You are trespassing." Security hesitated. The caterer glanced at Lorraine, then at me. Toby stepped forward from behind the tree-lined camera in hand, already recording. "I'd advise you all to leave," I said, "before things get complicated." Ethan finally moved. "Noah, wait. Let's talk," he said, walking toward me. I met his eyes. "You had years to talk." He stopped. The guests began to rise, chairs scraping, murmurs. Some moved toward the valet, others simply stood unsure. Ava looked around, desperate for someone to step in. Lorraine was gone. Her supporters scattered. "You're ruining this," Ava hissed. "You did that yourself," I said quietly. I handed the officiant a copy of the deed, another to the DJ. "You need to stop playing music," I told him. "This is not a venue. It's a crime scene." That landed like a punch. Ethan flinched. The DJ shut down the speakers. Slowly the illusion dissolved. Toby kept recording. I turned, walked back down the aisle alone, past stunned guests and flower arrangements, through decorations bought with money from men like me. The sun was bright and the wind was soft. This time it was my name they would remember. Sirens echoed faintly down the coast road just as I stepped back into the house. I didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this moment since the first time Ava smiled at me like I was invisible. An hour passed. The agents arrived in pairs, FBI uniformed officers, a plainclothes woman with a badge clipped to her belt who asked for Ava Kingsley by full name. I pointed toward the back patio. White dress, smiling. She's expecting cake. The arrest was quiet, professional. They waited for the music to stop before they approached. Ava didn't scream. She froze, lips parting like she couldn't quite compute that the center of her world was now under someone else's control. Ethan tried to speak. He reached for her, but Lorraine's voice came sharp from behind. "Don't, Ethan. Let them do their job." It was the last time I saw her speak with authority. Lorraine was arrested less than 30 minutes later at a gated estate across town. She tried to stall, claimed misunderstanding, but they had the tax documents, donation records, false identity files, and Craig Fulton's sworn statement. This time the law wasn't on her side. Ethan wasn't charged. The federal agents told me his name didn't appear on financial documentation tied to the fraud. He was a useful idiot, nothing more, but that didn't save his reputation. By nightfall, news broke on local outlets. Financial scam linked to Santa Barbara wedding. Identity fraud. Previous victims speaking out. Ava's face on the evening broadcast beside Lorraine's. Ethan's name included as the groom. Toby and I sat on the deck watching the sun dip behind the ocean, silent as headlines rolled in. Later, I handed Ethan a manila envelope. Inside a copy of our mother's will, the deed, and a letter she wrote me 2 months before she died. He read it in once. "I loved you both," it said, "but one of you learned to take. The other learned to stand alone. This house belongs to the one who knows how to carry truth." When he looked up, his eyes were damp. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of it." "You didn't want to know," I replied. I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I simply stood, looked him in the eye, and added, "She fooled you because you wanted someone to fill a void, but that void wasn't mine to fill, or hers." He left quietly. No apology, no fight. Just a man who'd finally seen what he'd been too proud to look at for years. As the sky darkened and the last guests cleared from memory, I sat on the edge of the deck, toes curled in the grain of weathered wood, listening to the waves. Justice didn't always arrive in fanfare. Sometimes it came like this. Quiet. Final. The house was quiet now. No music. No camera shutters. No heels clicking across the deck. Just the rhythm of the sea brushing against the cliffs below. I spent the next morning cleaning. Not just the obvious mess petals, ribbon, plastic flute stems, but the subtler scars. I pulled down every banner, folded the linens, took the trash out in silence. I worked slow, deliberate, like I was reclaiming each piece of the house. In the study, I found the picture frame that had been knocked off its hook. It held the photo of my mother and me from the last summer before she died. Her smile still warm, her hand resting over mine. I wiped the glass, rehung it in the same spot, straight this time. I opened the windows wide, let the salt air blow through. By the afternoon, I found the unopened envelope from 2 weeks ago. A real estate offer. 1.2 million, all cash, no contingencies. I held it between my fingers for a while, weighing the number like it might balance something in me. But the decision came easily. I dropped it in the shredder, watched the pieces curl inward and disappear. Some things were never meant for sale. That night, I poured myself a glass of my mother's favorite Merlot. The bottle had sat untouched since the funeral. I took it out to the deck, sat in the same spot she used to sit when she'd read in the evening. A notebook lay beside me. My old journal. I hadn't opened it in years. I turned to the last page and I wrote, "Mom, I kept it safe. I kept your word. I didn't give it to them, not even when it hurt. You said one day I'd need a place that was only mine. You were right, and no one, not even Ethan, gets to take that away now." The ink bled a little. The salt air, maybe. The stars came out one by one. I counted them like she used to make me do as a kid. One for each promise, one for every time I'd almost let go. I stayed there until the candle burned low. And for the first time in years, I slept without locking the door. The morning light poured through the curtains, warm and unfiltered. I woke slowly, not to the sound of an alarm or a knock on the door, but to the rhythmic hush of the ocean brushing the edge of the cliffs. The house was mine again. I brewed coffee in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of meaning. I sipped it while standing barefoot in the kitchen, watching the steam rise, knowing I didn't owe this morning to anyone but myself. Outside, the deck was still strewn with remnants of the wedding. Petals dried and curling at the edges, a forgotten champagne flute rolling under the railing. I picked everything up by hand, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet need to restore order, to reclaim every inch. I stripped the place of the decorations Ethan and Ava had brought in, the silk drapes, the rental furniture, the custom signage that read E&A forever. I tore it down piece by piece, By the time I was done, the house had exhaled. Later that afternoon, I opened the windows wide. Let the sea breeze fill the rooms, erasing their presence, their perfume, their noise. I put my mother's old quilt on the couch, hung back the paintings that used to line the hallway. I played her favorite Nina Simone record. The house felt alive again. The next day I walked the beach alone. No thoughts, just bare feet in the sand and the wind in my ears. A woman walking her dog smiled at me. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Back home, I opened the drawer in the study. Inside was my old leather-bound journal. I flipped to the last page and started writing. I wrote about betrayal, about truth, about how silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. About how revenge doesn't always need noise to land. Some evenings I cooked recipes I hadn't made since college. Others I just made grilled cheese and watched the sun set. I didn't post about it, I didn't document it, but on the 6th night I lit a candle on the edge of the deck and took a single photo, the ocean, the horizon, the warmth of light against the dark. I uploaded it with no caption, not as a warning, not as a flex, just as proof. A few days later, a certified letter arrived. A formal offer from a New York developer, $1.35 million for the house cash. They offered to let me keep naming rights for legacy. I shredded it. This wasn't just property, it was inheritance, it was memory, it was survival. I had no interest in giving it up. I heard Ethan had left town. I heard Ava pled guilty to multiple charges. Lorraine had fled the state but would likely be extradited. I didn't read the full articles. Toby sent them, but I let them sit in my inbox. That chapter was closed on the final morning of my self-given honeymoon. I sat on the deck barefoot again, sipping coffee. I thought about the vows people made at weddings and how many of them broke them. But I had kept mine, the one I made to my mother, to guard this house, this peace, to not let them win, and I had won. Not with noise, but with presence. If you've ever been cast out, erased, written off, I hope you know this, you don't.